Hi, this is Harrison Kaplan, and this is Nielsen Essentials.
One, and it is on fermentation. You may be asking, what is fermentation and why should I care? Fermentation is the chemical breakdown of a substance by bacteria, yeasts, or other microorganisms, typically involving bubbling and the giving off of heat. This process is used to create energy. You should care about fermentation because it is used in the process making of many different foods and is a process that goes on in our bodies. There are two types of fermentation. The first is ethanol fermentation. This is a metabolic process that converts carbohydrates into alcohol, which is used to obtain energy. This occurs with yeast and some other kinds of bacteria. So how does it work? Essentially, the glucose created by the carbohydrates undergo a process called glycolysis. During this process, glucose is converted into pyruvate through the reaction 2 ADP plus 2P yields 2 ATP, which forms the energy necessary for the reaction to take place. Pyruvate is the conjugate base to pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid is an organic acid that occurs as an intermediate in many metabolic processes, especially glycolysis. Pyruvate is then converted into acetaldehyde and carbon dioxide. Finally, the acetaldehyde is converted into ethanol. This makes the final reaction 1 mole of glucose yields 2 moles of ethanol and 2 moles of carbon dioxide. During this reaction, another reaction is also taking place. If you look in the middle of the diagram, you will see the redox reaction of NAD+ being converted into NADH. These electron carriers which temporarily store energy during cellular respiration. Where is metabolic fermentation used? It is generally used in foods such as kimchi, kombucha, the process of pickling, bread, beer, and more. So now to the second type of fermentation. If you've ever felt a burn after you exercise, what you're feeling is lactic acid being produced through the second type of fermentation, which is known as lactic acid fermentation. This occurs in bacteria and also in skeletal muscle that are low in oxygen. This is why when you exercise, you sometimes feel a burn in your legs. It is because you are expelling more oxygen than usual, so your muscles are low in oxygen. In order to get the energy needed to continue exercising, the lactic acid fermentation must take place. The process of lactic acid fermentation is very similar to the process of ethanol fermentation. Once again, the glucose is transferred into pyruvate through glycolysis. The pyruvate is then converted into lactic acid. This makes the final equation, 1 mole of glucose yields 2 moles of lactic acid. Aside from being a burn you feel in your body, lactic acid fermentation is used in foods like soy sauce, chocolate, cheese, and yogurt. One main key difference between the two kinds of fermentations is that ethanol fermentation releases carbon dioxide, whereas lactic acid fermentation does not. Another difference is that ethanol fermentation, the pyruvate is converted into acetaldehyde, whereas in lactic acid fermentation, the pyruvate is converted into lactic acid. So what should you have learned? Well, you should have learned what fermentation is. You should also be able to understand how ethanol fermentation works and how lactic acid fermentation works and the differences between the two. And I hope that was helpful.